excited to be here with Mackenzie, who is a sustainability manager at a company called Bluebird Climate, which you are going to be hearing about in just a moment. But as you all know, we recently launched a line of 6 fine fragrances as Future Society, and we worked together very closely with our suppliers to try and make the best sustainability decisions that we could. But it was really important to us to bring in a third party that are really experts in this to help basically give us feedback on what we're doing really well and where we can get better. And so that's exactly why we partnered with Bluebird. So I'm really excited to be walking everyone through basically what our assessment turned out to be like. And you can actually access that on our website. But we're just going to be going through the different components and decisions that we made. And I'm really excited to see what we're going to learn, because sustainability certainly is a moving target and something that you just continue to work on with time. So with that, Mackenzie, do you want to maybe introduce yourself and also introduce Bluebird Climate a little bit?
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for having me. This is so fun, and we have loved partnering with your brand. Congrats on the launch. I think what you are doing is so important and so great, and we're just excited to be one of your trusted partners. I know that everything that you do is really backed by science, and excited to share the hard work that you've done. So a little bit about Bluebird Climate. We're on a mission to help the beauty and wellness industry really wrap their hands around the environmental impact of their products and then make lower carbon and lower waste products. So our software really allows brands of any size, large, small, pre-launch, launched for 30 years, whatever it is, make informed decisions and reduce the embedded emissions that are currently in their products, and then also develop new products. And so you'll kind of see that as we walk through the report and what that actually meant for Future Society and the products that you just launched. I kind of like to think about our company having a 2-part mission. If part 1 is really helping brands internally combat or like take accountability for their product's impact, part 2 is helping them then share that information with their consumers, not just to get credit, but to credibly share the work that they're doing. Greenwashing is so prevalent in the industry, and I don't think it's to any brand's fault. I think sometimes there's just like lack of data or information. So we take it on ourselves to arm brands with really credible information that they can say about their products, and just excited to share the information. And a little background just on what Future Society did is you conducted life cycle assessments on 100% of your products, and a life cycle assessment, or often called LCAs, is a scientific and comprehensive analysis. I think you've talked about it before, but it evaluates the environmental impact of the product throughout its entire life cycle. And I think that this is an important step. It's not necessarily like the only step to take, but if you think about all the decisions that went into making your amazing fragrances, LCAs was one of the spokes in the wheel of the decision making. You had to think about compatibility and costs and availability of materials and minimum order quantities, I'm sure, like all of these things, but the LCA data really can be a guiding light as you figure out, hey, what's the most sustainable packaging for this product? So happy to be here and walk through the reports with you.
Let's do it.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen.
So one of the things that I'll just share with everyone is that, like, actually working with Bluebird was the first time it really felt like we could do something concrete. Prior to that, we had like spoken to a bunch of experts and consultants, and we learned things from all of them. But in terms of like making something really actionable and concrete for us to work with, that felt really difficult. So we were really excited to do this because it was very tangible and specific, which you're going to see right now.
Okay, so something that I think is also really great is not only did you use the software internally to make decisions, but to the point, you're sharing this information widely on all of your product display pages for your consumers to see, really backing up the information. So we'll touch on recycling in a little bit, but I think first, coming with climate transparency. And at Bluebird, we call this the transparency report. Nowadays, products that it's really important for brands to back up the claims that they're making. So anyone can click on this see full transparency report and we'll kind of walk through it. This is just the high level benchmarking the products about how they're doing in the market. And I think sometimes we get a little scared when we see things in the red, and we'll kind of talk about some ways that we can maybe get closer to the green, or why things are how they are. But I think something to really celebrate at Future Society and these products is that you've achieved low carbon emissions for this product. And that's not easy to do, and also not something that all brands are currently caring about. And more we see some regulation and legislation coming down the pike where this is important, and it is something to get ahead of. So the transparency reports will take you through all the different things that are contributing to a product's embedded carbon emissions. And some of these factors include material and product design, your supply chain design, and distribution emissions. I think most often we think about once we get the physical product, we can have it in our hands, but there's so many upstream things that are happening that contribute to emissions that you've been able to achieve a lower embedded carbon emissions, which is really great. And so one thing I like to kind of key in on is how you're getting your packaging from point A to point B, your finished good, all of those things. And in this supply chain design card here, anyone can see the methods of transportation, and you've prioritized sea transportation, which we see is really great. There's like a stat that we often use that the average beauty product travels between 5,000 and 15,000 miles. And that's a lot of travel for just one product. And shipping by air can really increase the carbon emissions by like 20 times. So using sea, which often takes longer, which means you have to be thinking about things a lot farther in advance, is a huge win, not only for your company, but for the embedded emissions.
Wow. So 20 times more for air travel.
Yes, that's kind of like the average, depending on, you know, how big your supply chain is and where you're sourcing packaging and your raw materials from. But wherever possible, sea transportation is favorable over air.
Yep. Okay.
And then same goes for distribution. I think something that consumers have gotten used to is like you order something online and it shows up at your house within hours, if not the day after. And I'm guilty of it too, but thinking about the emissions that go into that transportation rushed express is also really important. And so something that your brand has really taken account is like you're going to prioritize ground shipping, which we see as a major win.
And a lot of the decision making that went into this, and kudos to our supply chain team, was really around the placement of our fulfillment center, and what touch points we had so that we could ensure basically delivery within 3 days for as much of the United States as we possibly could using ground shipping. So that was one of the goals there, and not necessarily easy to achieve.
For sure. And definitely probably many months went into thoughtfully designing and selecting partners. So kudos to your team. And then lastly, on this waste assessment, and we'll get into those recyclability instructions, each component, so each part of the packaging, is evaluated individually based on its materials and its dimensions and its expected disposal outcome. And so we kind of look at 3 factors, recyclability, degradability, and extended product life, when we're thinking about what does it mean for waste. And I like to debunk some of the common, like, once I put something in the recycling bin, it's going to be recycled. That's not always the case. There's certain materials that have much lower recyclability factors. Like you're different. I live in California, you live in Boston. There's different recycling facilities. So lots of factors that go into the waste of the product. We use a few standards. One, how to recycles, methodology when it comes to material and end of life, And then we also have partnered with the Pack Collective, which is a really great nonprofit here in the US and in North America. They have Canadian partners as well that are dedicated to increasing circularity in the beauty and wellness industry. And so we'll kind of talk on that when we go through your end of life instructions. But again, keying in that you've made some really smart decisions to lower the embedded emissions almost as much as possible in your products.
Okay.
Okay, so on the recycling instructions page, which again is you can find on all of your PDPs, which I think is so great and helpful. We've identified the different components that go into each of your fragrances. You can see that you've achieved 50% post-consumer recycled glass. And I know that this was probably a big decision that you made. Glass is a heavy product. It's emissions intensive. And so not creating virgin glass is great to lower the emissions, but also gives that recycled glass potential for new life.
Yeah.
Same with the folding carton, you were able to use recycled materials and in the cap and in the pump. So you'll see that there are some products that are recyclable via drop-off, meaning they can't go in a curbside bin. And this isn't because you picked a bad material necessarily. It's just because there's limitations at the local level when it comes to size and format of what can be properly broken down. So as I mentioned,
wild for me to learn. I actually had no idea. I felt so naive when I found out, but I just thought if it's recyclable because it's made out of this material, then it's fine. I didn't know that there were any sort of size restrictions or limitations. So that was a big learning for us.
I think, you're not the only one.
Yeah.
And it is a little unfortunate and something hopefully that as more consumer demand is there and we're producing these products that the facilities will catch up. But essentially one of the factors of recyclability is size. And so anything smaller generally than 2 by 2 inches by 2 inches in 2 dimensions. So the cap is not 2 inches by 2 inches, but it would be hard to have a giant cap on a small bottle.
Yeah.
So while you have chosen a material that in theory is recyclable,
the
size of it determines that if it goes in your blue bin, most likely it'll slip through the grates at one of these local facilities and then end up in the landfill. That said, there are solutions, and one of them would be to recycle it via a drop-off facility, which I know is an added step for consumers. And as a consumer myself, it's something you kind of have to build the muscle on, but we're trying to make it as easy as possible for any future society consumer. And there's definitely products around your house that also could go to a collection bin. So what that means is you can search your address or your zip code and find your nearest bin. Mine is located in a Sephora that's just up the street. And I keep a little cardboard box filled with, my flexible tubes and things that unfortunately aren't curbside recyclable, and drop them off every once in a while.
Interesting. Why are tubes not recyclable always?
Same thing with the facilities. Flexible plastic, unfortunately, is not curbside recyclable. So your plastic bags and flexible tubes being one of them. Sometimes tubes are made out of multiple materials very closely mushed together for product compatibility and things like that. Even monomaterial tubes are not able to be recognized at facilities and often just end up in landfills. So
interesting.
Again, lots of decision making that goes into play. There are definitely a time and a place when tubes make sense, but using these facilities and these programs like what PACT has offered is a great way to just ensure that there's a second life possible for these non-curbside recyclable products.
Got it. Okay.
So I think that this is really great that you've put this information, both recyclability and climate and waste, widely available for your consumers. It's definitely an education piece, and we can talk about maybe we've talked about the wins, you've designed this really great supply chain, but some areas of improvement, I think there's always areas of improvement for any brand. You're doing a really great job. You're doing the life cycle assessments. Our software can model out different scenarios. And we had kind of talked about, refillables being one of them. Like, does that make sense? We can help you model that out. Lots of factors go into that, like consumer adoption being number one. You had concerns around, like, is that just too much for consumers to do? It's
Right.
a valid thought. But there are different ways too. We can work on lightweighting. You've already picked a very lightweight bottle, as lightweight as like you probably can, but maybe there's rooms for opportunity to figure out if you want to lightweight anymore. And then again, continuing to check in if you end up changing suppliers and you happen to find a supplier that's producing a bottle that's a little bit closer to home. Little changes add up. And so it's exciting to launch your product with this data in mind. And as you iterate, always coming back to it.
Yeah. So it seems like the bottle might be the place that has the largest impact. Is that right?
Naturally, the bottle is going to have the largest impact just because it's the largest component.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the product from a 360 lens.
Mhm.
And you chose glass for a reason. Like, it is a recyclable material. It's compatible with your formula. And there is that kind of like consumer aesthetic, like luxe feel. And so one of the ways we score waste is through like measuring the mass that could end up in a landfill. And so glass is heavier than alternative materials, which is going to put its waste a little bit higher.
Okay. And then for refillables, how do people usually ship refillables? I think we internally had like a mixed reaction to refillables because, as you had mentioned, it feels like it puts the burden of a lot of the sustainability pieces on consumers. And we really feel like it's the responsibility of the industry to, create elegant solutions here. But yeah, like what type of shipping in for refillables for something like a fragrance would work? Because fragrances are volatile, and I would imagine that pouring things from one into another would be like problematic. Have you seen any good solutions out there?
I think that one, I love that you're thinking about the consumers, because sometimes I feel as though products get launched without the consumer thought in mind. And so thinking about how the consumer is going to do this, not everybody loves a science project at home or a very, build it yourself situation. And so I think that there's new technologies. The packaging industry is pretty wild. There's new technologies every single year. I'm sure you've gone to those conferences where they're all on display. And so what I say this year about refillables could be completely different next year. And that's why I think having these baseline assessments year after year, life cycle assessments, best practice is to conduct them on a yearly basis. So things will change. Again, maybe you move a supplier or your supplier has gotten materials from a different place. There's things that happen within a year of purchasing your goods, or whichever cadence that you do it at. And so the refillables that I see on the market currently might not make sense for your fragrance at the moment, but I'm not saying that that doesn't make sense down the line as new innovation and technology comes out. I think you did such a great job of finding a really great glass bottle, again, with a high PCR percentage, which we see as like best practice.
Yeah. Okay, that's good to know. And we'll certainly keep our eyes and ears peeled. I think, we have like a special clamp thing that's here so you can still separate it out, which I think a lot of people don't know. And we're going to try and message that because we found that like the other threaded versions, they just leak too easily in shipping. And again, it really affects the experience that you have with the product to just get something that's leaked all over the place, particularly if it's a fragrance, it's kind of shabby. So, we're pretty pleased with how that turned out, and that we really credit to our supplier for really having a great solution there. But yeah, the refillable piece is pretty interesting. And then maybe looking at different ways that we can treat or process the glass. It is lighter. It still feels like good and substantial in some way. But perhaps something else that we can work with our supplier on too.
Yeah, that thoughtful design of being able to easily separate, not easily, but be able to separate the pump from the bottle is huge. Going back to recycling facilities really require materials to be separated. So the glass would need to be separated from the metal. And typically pumps are made of mixed materials, totally normal. It's the innovation. That's how pumps are currently created. So being able to separate those apart as well is also key to get them into the proper streams. And it's not necessarily up to consumers. Again, like consumers are needing to do all of their own research on so many things. And I hope that the industry and the systems will change. But until then, just having this information, and I think what you're doing, the education piece is so important and great.
So if we were to be working on future product launches and working to select our future packaging and other key decision points within our supply chain, it sounds like you all would be working very closely with us to help us assess the impact of different decisions that we could make for those products. So it doesn't just have to happen at the end. It could actually happen as a partnership throughout the process, right?
Correct. Part of our software, so part one that we're seeing today is like the product is in market, you've done the life cycle assessment, you get the report, you can share it out. On the internal side, what your team has been using is what we call our new product development tool. And you can make these side-by-side comparisons, almost like estimations, where you have enough information, like maybe you wanted to double the size of the bottle, like make a jumbo size. How would that impact the emissions? These are all things that we can model out in the software. Or you were going to move your distribution center from point A to point B. How's that impacting emissions embedded in the product? So all things happening upstream prior to you even selecting a packaging can be done in the software, which is really great.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. Well, this was really helpful. Thank you so much for walking me through this. I'm really excited that we have this up and running on our website, and we have like a very viable kind of starting point to continue to make improvements on too.
So inspired by your brand and your mission and your level of transparency that you're sharing on all things. And so excited to continue to work with your team as well.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie. This was really great. I'm so glad we were able to do this.
Likewise.
All right. Now I have to stop recording and figure out how to do that.